The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Liberty Park as Officer Robert Hayes pulled his patrol car into the parking lot. The dispatcher's voice still echoed in his mind. Disturbance at Liberty Park War Memorial. Male subject acting erratically, possibly intoxicated. It was his third call today, and Robert sighed as he adjusted his body camera and stepped out into the warm spring air. Robert had been with the department for 7 years now. At 34, he'd seen his fair share of public disturbances, usually homeless folks or teenagers causing trouble. As he walked toward the memorial, he spotted a small crowd of onlookers keeping their distance from a man pacing back and forth in front of the granite wall etched with names. The man didn't look homeless. Exactly, but he wasn't put together either. His brown jacket hung unevenly on his frame and his jeans were worn at the knees. He was talking to himself, occasionally raising his voice and gesturing at the memorial wall. Robert noticed how people walked wide circles around him, parents pulling their children closer as they hurried past. "Afternoon, sir," Robert called out, keeping his tone casual but firm as he approached. "Everything all right over here?" The man spun around and Robert caught his first good look at him. Mid-40s, unshaven for days with deep circles under bloodshot eyes. But there was something else, a straightness to his posture despite the dishevelment, like old habits fighting through whatever was troubling him. "I'm fine," the man snapped, then immediately looked down at his worn boots, just paying respects. "That's allowed, right?" Robert nodded slowly, maintaining a safe distance. "Of course it is. I'm Officer Hayes. Mind telling me your name?" The man hesitated, eyes darting around as if looking for escape routes. Tom Reed." "All right, Tom, some folks were concerned about your behavior. Said you were shouting?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Wasn't shouting, just talking." Robert noticed Tom's hand disappear into his jacket pocket and his training kicked in. 7 years on the force taught him to spot potential threats, and concealed hands were always a red flag. His own hand shifted slightly closer to his belt. "I'm going to need you to keep your hands where I can see them, Tom," Robert said, his voice dropping lower. For a moment, Tom seemed confused. Then understanding washed over his face, followed quickly by anger. "You think I'm dangerous? You think I'm some kind of threat?" His voice rose with each question. A woman nearby pulled out her phone and started recording. Great, Robert thought. Just what he needed. An audience. "Sir, I'm just asking you to show me your hands," Robert repeated, taking a step closer. Standard procedure. Tom pulled his hand out empty but kept it clenched in a fist. "There, happy now, officer." The way he said officer made it sound like an insult. Robert took a breath. This situation was escalating, but he couldn't tell if Tom was intoxicated, mentally ill, or just having a really bad day. The man's eyes were clear despite being bloodshot, and he wasn't slurring his words, but something was definitely off. "Have you been drinking today, Tom?" Robert asked, scanning for other signs of intoxication. "No." Tom's response was sharp, offended. I haven't had a drink in 3 years. Another lie, probably. Robert had heard plenty of those. But the memorial wall behind Tom gave him another idea. "You serve?" he asked, nodding toward the names engraved in stone. Something flickered in Tom's eyes. Recognition, maybe even relief at being understood. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by that same guarded hostility. "What's it to you?" Tom muttered. "Just curious. My brother was in the army, 2 tours in Iraq." This wasn't strictly true. Robert didn't have a brother, but he'd found that building rapport helped in situations like this. "Look, Tom, I'm not here to make trouble for you, but I need you to calm down and tell me what's going on." Tom's shoulders sagged slightly. "I am calm. Or I was until you showed up." His hand went back toward his pocket and Robert tensed again. "Hands, Tom. Please." Tom ignored the request, digging deeper into his jacket. That was enough. Robert stepped forward, reaching for his handcuffs. "Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back." "What?" Tom's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're arresting me. For what?" "Disorderly conduct, for starters," Robert said, moving closer, "and failing to comply with an officer's instructions." The small crowd had grown larger. More phones were out now, recording the confrontation. Robert could feel the weight of those lenses on him, judging every move. But he had a job to do, and this man was becoming increasingly unpredictable. "Turn around, sir," Robert ordered, his patience wearing thin. Tom's face darkened. "I didn't do anything wrong." I was just standing here minding my own business. The reports say you were shouting and disturbing others in the park. Now please turn around and put your hands behind your back." Instead of complying, Tom took a step backward, bumping into the memorial wall. His hand was still in his pocket and Robert couldn't see what he might be gripping in there. Training took over. Robert closed the distance quickly, grabbed Tom's free arm and attempted to turn him around. What happened next surprised him. Tom moved with unexpected precision, twisting his arm free with a practiced motion that spoke of training. Not the flailing of a drunk or the desperate struggle of a common troublemaker. This was different. "Don't touch me," Tom growled, his voice low and dangerous. Robert reached for his radio. "I need backup at Liberty Park Memorial, one subject possible." "You don't understand," Tom interrupted, something desperate creeping into his voice. "You don't understand what day this is." Robert paused, hand still on his radio. "Why don't you explain it to me, then?" The crowd had formed a loose semicircle around them. Robert could hear the murmurs, could practically feel the judgment. Another cop harassing someone, another video about to go viral, but he couldn't worry about that now. This man was unpredictable, possibly dangerous, and Robert needed to maintain control of the situation. "Sir, one more time," Robert said firmly. "Remove your hand from your pocket slowly, then turn around." Tom shook his head, a strange mixture of defiance and despair crossing his face. "I can't, not today." "I made a promise." Robert's patience was gone. He advanced again, reaching for Tom's arm, only to find himself expertly blocked once more. Where did this guy learn to move like that? The thought had barely formed when Tom's stance shifted subtly, feet positioning in a way that any trained fighter would recognize. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Robert warned, aware that his backup would arrive any minute. "Whatever's going on, we can talk about it at the station." "You think I'm some criminal?" Tom said, his voice suddenly quiet. "You have no idea who I am or why I'm here." Robert's hand moved to his taser. He didn't want to use it, but Tom's continued resistance was leaving him few options. "Then tell me." Tom looked past Robert at the gathering crowd, at all the phones pointed their way, recording what was quickly becoming a spectacle. Something in his expression changed, like he was coming back to himself from somewhere far away. "I'm a veteran," he said finally, the words heavy with meaning. "And today is important." Before Robert could respond, the sound of sirens approached from the distance. Backup was almost here. Whatever was about to happen would unfold with an audience of both civilians and fellow officers. Robert had seconds to decide how to proceed. "Being a veteran doesn't put you above the law," Robert said, though his tone softened slightly. "But if you cooperate now, we can sort this out." Tom's hand finally emerged from his pocket and Robert tensed, ready to react. But what Tom pulled out wasn't what anyone expected. "I've written part 1 of the story as requested, focusing on creating an engaging narrative with natural language and simple wording. The story builds tension between the officer and the veteran while setting up the conflict that will lead to the revelation in later parts. Would you like me to continue with part 2, or would you prefer any changes to part 1 before moving forward?" Tom's hand emerged from his pocket, but instead of the weapon Robert feared, he was clutching what looked like a small worn photograph. Robert couldn't make out the image from where he stood, but the way Tom's fingers gripped it, protectively, reverently, made it clear this was something important to him. "Put that down and turn around," Robert ordered, relief mixing with frustration. The situation was drawing too much attention now. He needed to regain control. "No." Tom's response was quiet but firm as he carefully returned the photo to his pocket. The first backup car pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing. Officer Diane Chen stepped out, quickly assessing the scene before approaching. Robert felt a surge of relief. Diane was good in tense situations, level-headed and experienced. "Last chance," Robert warned Tom. "Cooperate now or things get a lot more complicated." Something changed in Tom's expression then. A hardening, a resolve setting in. "You want to arrest me for standing at a memorial? For honoring my friends? Go ahead and try." Robert reached for Tom's arm again, and this time the response was immediate and precise. Tom pivoted smoothly, using Robert's momentum against him, slipping from his grasp with movements that spoke of years of training. Not street fighting or prison yard techniques, this was disciplined, practiced military. "Sir, stop resisting." Robert called out, aware of how this looked to the growing audience. "I'm not your enemy," Tom said through clenched teeth. He wasn't throwing punches or attempting to flee, just preventing Robert from restraining him. "I have a right to be here." Diane approached cautiously from the side. "Sir, please calm down. We just need to talk." Tom's eyes darted between the two officers, his breathing becoming more rapid. Robert recognized the signs. This wasn't just anger or defiance. The man was experiencing some kind of episode. The way his eyes occasionally unfocused, how he flinched at the sound of a car backfiring in the distance. Classic signs of PTSD. "Tom," Robert said, intentionally using his name, trying to ground him in the present. "Whatever's happening, we can help, but you need to stop resisting first." Tom backed up until he was pressed against the memorial wall. His hand went to his pocket again, the same one with the photograph. "You don't understand what day this is," he repeated, his voice catching slightly. A third patrol car pulled up. Great, Robert thought. This was turning into a circus. "Look around you," Diane said calmly, gesturing to the crowd. "There are families here, children. Whatever you're going through, this isn't helping." Tom followed her gesture, seeming to truly notice the onlookers for the first time. The fight visibly drained from him, replaced by something worse: shame. But still he wouldn't turn around, wouldn't submit to the handcuffs. "My unit," he started, then stopped, struggling to find words. "Today is—" He broke off again. Robert exchanged a glance with Diane. They'd both dealt with veterans in crisis before. The department had training for this, but it was always complicated, always unpredictable. Robert lowered his voice, speaking only to Tom now, not to the audience of phones and judgment. "Were you in combat?" Tom's laugh was hollow, painful to hear. "3 tours. Afghanistan. Force recon." That explained the way he moved, the instinctive responses. Force recon was elite. These weren't regular grunts, but specially trained Marines, the best of the best. Robert felt a new respect forming, but it didn't change the situation. Tom had still caused a disturbance, still resisted a lawful order. "Thank you for your service," Robert said sincerely, "but I still need you to cooperate with us now." "My service," Tom echoed bitterly. "You know what today is, Officer Hayes? 6 years ago today, I lost everyone. Every single one of them." His voice cracked on the last word. Before Robert could respond, 2 more officers approached from behind. Jackson and Rivera, both younger guys, eager to prove themselves. Robert recognized their walk, knew they were ready to take Tom down hard if given the chance. "We got this," Jackson called out. "Hand already on his taser." "Hold position," Robert ordered sharply, not taking his eyes off Tom. To Tom, he said, "Talk to me. What happened 6 years ago?" Tom's eyes seemed to look through him, seeing something else, somewhere else. "Patrol in Helmand Province. It wasn't supposed to be hot, just routine sweep. We'd done it a dozen times." Robert raised his hand slightly, signaling the other officers to stay back. This was delicate now. Tom was opening up, and pushing too hard could shut him down completely, or worse, trigger a more severe episode. "IED took out our lead vehicle," Tom continued, his voice distant. "Then the ambush started. Crossfire from 3 positions. We were pinned down for hours." His breathing quickened, and Robert could see he was reliving it right there in the park. "I was the radio man. Kept calling for air support, evac, anything. By the time the choppers came," he trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. "You were the only one who made it," Robert guessed quietly. Tom's eyes refocused, locking onto Robert's. The raw pain there made Robert want to look away, but he held the gaze. 7 men, brothers, best men I ever knew." Diane stepped forward cautiously. "We understand this is a difficult day for you, but causing a scene isn't going to honor their memory." "I wasn't causing a scene," Tom insisted, anger flaring again. "I was talking to them, telling them what's been happening back home." His hand went to his pocket again, and this time he pulled out not just one photo but several, worn and creased from frequent handling. "I promised I'd visit every year. Tell them they're not forgotten." Robert felt something twist in his chest. The crowd was still there, phones still recording, but suddenly it all seemed wrong, intrusive, disrespectful. This wasn't a criminal situation. It was a man grieving, a private moment that had been misunderstood. "The call said you were shouting," Diane said gently. "Disturbing people." Tom shook his head. "I get frustrated sometimes when the words don't come out right, when the memories get too loud. His hands were trembling now, the photos fluttering slightly. Sometimes I lose track of where I am, what year it is. Robert recognized what was happening. Tom wasn't drunk or high. He'd been having a flashback or an episode when the calls came in, and now they had escalated a mental health situation into a potential arrest, with an audience no less. "Officer Hayes," Jackson called impatiently from a few yards back. "You want us to take him in or what?" Robert made a quick decision. "Stand down. We're good here." To Tom, he said, "Put your photos away for now. Let's move somewhere quieter to talk." Tom hesitated, clutching the photos tightly. "You're not arresting me?" "Not if you'll cooperate and talk to us calmly," Robert said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." A flash of relief crossed Tom's face, followed immediately by suspicion. "Why the change? You were ready to cuff me a minute ago." Robert glanced at the memorial wall, at the hundreds of names carved into the stone. "Let's just say I'm listening now. Really listening." Tom carefully tucked the photos back into his jacket pocket, but his hand lingered there, as if drawing strength from them. "What do you want to know?" "Everything you're willing to tell me," Robert said honestly. "About today, about what happened over there, about why you're here alone." Tom's posture changed slightly. Still alert, still wary, but the fight-or-flight tension had eased somewhat. "You got time for all that, officer? Don't you have real criminals to catch?" The bitterness in his voice was sharp but understandable. "Right now, my job is right here," Robert replied. He gestured to a bench several yards away outside the ring of onlookers. "Let's sit down. No cuffs, no arrest. Just talk." Tom looked at the bench, then at the officers surrounding him, weighing his options. Robert could almost see the internal struggle playing out. The military training saying never surrender position. The civilian part recognizing a chance to de-escalate. "Your call," Robert added quietly. "But I think we both want the same thing right now, for all these people to stop staring and recording." That seemed to reach Tom. He nodded once, a short, sharp jerk of his head. "Fine. We'll talk." As they moved toward the bench, Tom reaching into his jacket one more time. Robert tensed automatically, but what emerged wasn't a photo this time. It was something that caught the afternoon sun with a dull gleam. Metal, hanging from a purple ribbon, and suddenly, the entire situation shifted again. I've written part 2 as requested, continuing the story while building tension and revealing more about Tom's background. This part focuses on the resistance aspect while setting up for the revelation that will come in part 3. The narrative maintains the engaging style from part 1 while exploring the veteran's emotional state and the officer's growing understanding of the situation. I've kept the language natural and accessible without oversimplifying. Would you like me to continue with part 3? Or would you prefer any adjustments to this section first? The purple heart medal dangled from Tom's fingers, catching the sunlight as he held it up. The crowd went quiet. Even the officers who had been ready to rush in seemed to freeze in place, the significance of what they were seeing not lost on anyone. 3 tours, Tom said quietly. This was from the second one. Edie on a routine patrol. I was lucky, just shrapnel in my leg and shoulder. Got patched up and sent right back out. Robert stared at the medal, its purple ribbon slightly frayed from years of handling. The Purple Heart, awarded only to those wounded or killed in combat. Not something you could fake, not something given lightly. The bench offers still stand? Tom asked, his voice steadier now. Robert nodded, finding his voice. Yes, of course. They walked in silence to the bench, away from the memorial wall and the crowd of onlookers. Some people, sensing the shift in mood, had already begun to disperse. Others still watched from a distance, phones lowered now, respect replacing curiosity. Diane signaled to Jackson and Rivera to stand down. They hesitated but eventually retreated to their patrol cars, clearly confused by the change in approach but following orders. As they sat, Robert noticed how Tom kept the medal in his hand, thumb running over its surface in what seemed like an unconscious gesture, a habit born from years of carrying it. You want to tell me what really happened today? Robert asked gently. Before I arrived. Tom took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the memorial wall in the distance. I come here every year on this day. It's the anniversary. I bring their photos, tell them what's been happening back home. It sounds crazy, I know. It doesn't sound crazy at all, Robert said honestly. Tom looked surprised, as if he'd expected judgment. Usually I'm more together. I take the day off work, shower, shave, put on decent clothes. Today was different. He gestured vaguely at his disheveled appearance. Couldn't sleep for the past 3 nights. Nightmares are always worse around the anniversary. Robert nodded, giving him space to continue. I didn't even realize I was talking out loud, Tom admitted. Sometimes the line between what's in my head and what's coming out of my mouth gets blurry, especially when it's about them. He pulled out the photos again, handling them with care despite his trembling fingers. May I? Robert asked, indicating the photos. Tom hesitated, protective instinct visible in his eyes. These weren't just pictures to him. They were sacred objects, connections to people long gone. After a moment, he carefully handed them over, watching Robert's every move. The photos were worn, creased, colors fading at the edges from years of handling. 7 men in combat gear, standing in front of a military vehicle, desert landscape stretching behind them. Some were smiling, others wearing the serious expression of men trying to look tough for the camera. Young faces, none looked older than 30. This was your unit? Robert asked, studying the faces of men who didn't know their time was short when this photo was taken. Tom nodded. Force Recon. We'd been together for almost 2 years by then. He leaned over, pointing to each face. That's Wilson, best sniper I ever met. Could hit a target at 1,500 meters like it was nothing. Carver next to him, guy could fix anything with duct tape and a paperclip. Real MacGyver type. As Tom pointed to each man, telling small stories about their talents, their quirks, their dreams for when they got home, Robert saw him transform. The agitation melted away, replaced by a bittersweet fondness. These weren't just fallen comrades, they were brothers. And this one? Robert asked, pointing to a stocky man with a wide grin standing next to a younger-looking Tom. Rodriguez, Tom said, voice softening. My best friend. Saved my life more times than I could count. Had a girl back home, was going to propose when we got back. He swallowed hard. I was carrying the ring for him when it happened. He didn't want to lose it on patrol. Robert handed the photos back carefully. What happened that day, if you want to talk about it? Tom was quiet for a long moment, and Robert thought maybe he'd pushed too far. But then he started speaking, his voice distant, as if reciting facts about someone else's life. Routine patrol. We'd swept that area a dozen times before. Nothing special about that day. Nothing that should have tipped us off. Tom's fingers tightened around the metal. First IED took out our lead vehicle. Rodriguez was driving. Then the shooting started. He described the ambush in precise military terms, firing positions, cover options, strategic decisions. But beneath the technical language, Robert could hear the horror of it, the chaos and fear that no training could fully prepare anyone for. I was the radio man, Tom continued. Kept calling for backup, for air support, for anything. We were pinned down for nearly 3 hours, by the time help arrived. He trailed off. You were the only one left, Robert finished gently. Tom nodded, eyes unfocused. Took shrapnel in my back, bullet through my shoulder. Still don't know how I survived when they didn't. Survivor's guilt, Robert said quietly. That's what they call it. Tom's eyes snapped to him, suddenly sharp. You serve? Robert hesitated. He'd lied earlier about having a brother in the army, a technique to build rapport. But now, faced with Tom's raw honesty, a lie felt disrespectful. Army. Military police. 1 tour in Iraq, he admitted. Nothing like what you went through. Combat is combat, Tom said with a shrug. Doesn't matter where or how long, changes you either way. A moment of understanding passed between them, not the full comprehension of shared experience. Their military careers had been very different, but the recognition of someone else who knew, even a little, what it meant to put on the uniform, to carry a weapon in a foreign land, to live with the consequences. When I got back, Tom continued, I didn't know what to do with myself. Military was all I knew. Force Recon was my whole life for 8 years, coming back to civilian life. He made a helpless gesture. It's like learning to walk again. How long have you been back? Robert asked. 6 years. Same as. Tom gestured toward the memorial. Got my discharge after the hospital. Medical retirement. PTSD. Nerve damage in my shoulder. The works. And how's civilian life treating you now? Robert kept his tone conversational, not clinical like the therapist Tom had probably seen too many of. A hollow laugh escaped Tom. Some days are better than others. Got a job as a security consultant. The skills translate, at least. Have my own apartment. Go to therapy twice a month. Take my meds. Most of the time. But not recently, Robert guessed. Tom looked away. They make everything foggy. I didn't want to be foggy today. Wanted to be present for them. He nodded toward the photos in his hand. Robert understood. He'd known other veterans who struggled with medication. The balance between managing symptoms and feeling like yourself was rarely perfect. The people who called it in, Robert said carefully. They said you were shouting, scaring kids. Tom winced, genuine remorse crossing his face. I don't remember shouting. Sometimes I lose track of where I am, what year it is, especially on days like today. He ran a hand over his face. I'd never intentionally scare anyone, especially not kids. I believe you, Robert said, and he meant it. They sat in silence for a moment, watching as the last of the crowd dispersed. Diane was still there, keeping a respectful distance but clearly monitoring the situation. The other officers had returned to their vehicles, crisis apparently averted. So what happens now? Tom finally asked. You still going to arrest me? Robert shook his head. Not unless you give me a reason to. But I do need to make sure you're okay before I leave. Department policy for welfare checks. I'm fine, Tom said automatically, then grimaced. That's not true, but I will be. Once I finish what I came here to do. Robert glanced at the memorial wall. The ritual with the photos? Tom nodded. I talked to them. Tell them what's been happening, how the world's changed. It sounds stupid when I say it out loud. It doesn't sound stupid at all, Robert assured him. It sounds like remembrance, honoring their memory. Would you? Tom started, then stopped, looking embarrassed. Never mind. What is it? Tom hesitated, then squared his shoulders. Would you stand with me? While I finish? Having another uniform there, even a different one. It would mean something. The request caught Robert by surprise. An hour ago, he'd been ready to arrest this man. Now he was being invited to participate in what was clearly a deeply personal ritual. I'd be honored, he said simply. I've written part 3 of the story, focusing on the revelation of Tom's experiences and the beginning of a connection between the two men. This part explores the emotional depth of Tom's situation while maintaining an engaging narrative that builds naturally from the previous sections. The story continues to develop with simple but meaningful language, avoiding any content that might violate YouTube policies while keeping the human element central to the storytelling. Would you like me to write part 4 next, or would you prefer any adjustments to part 3 first? They walked back to the memorial wall together, Robert slightly behind Tom, giving him space while still showing support. Diane caught Robert's eye, a silent question passing between them. He nodded once, letting her know the situation was under control. She responded with a subtle thumbs up and retreated further, maintaining visibility but giving them privacy. The wall stood solemn in the late afternoon light, names etched in stone catching shadows that made them seem to rise from the surface. Tom stopped a few feet away, taking a deep breath as if preparing himself. I usually do this alone, he admitted quietly. Never had anyone else here before. I can step back if you prefer, Robert offered. Tom shook his head. No, it's good. They'd appreciate another uniform being here. He pulled the photos from his pocket again, along with a small roll of clear tape. I tape their pictures next to their names every year, just for a little while. Take them down before I leave. Robert watched as Tom approached the wall, his movements becoming more deliberate, almost ceremonial. The transformation was striking. The agitated, defensive man from earlier was gone, replaced by someone moving with purpose and dignity. Tom stopped at a section of the wall where 7 names were engraved in sequence. His unit must have been added together, Robert realized. 7 men who died on the same day, in the same place. Wilson, Andrew J., Tom said, carefully taping the first photo beside the corresponding name. Best spotter in the regiment, could read wind conditions like they were written in the air. One by one, he placed each photo, speaking the name aloud, followed by something personal, a memory, a talent, a dream they'd had. Robert stood at attention, without being asked to, understanding instinctively that this was not just a personal ritual but a military one, a roll call for the fallen. Rodriguez Carlos M., Tom said finally, placing the last photo with extra care. My brother in everything but blood. Promised to be the best man at my wedding. I promised the same. His voice caught. Still keeping that promise, brother. Still waiting. When all 7 photos were placed, Tom stepped back and stood at attention, delivering a perfect salute. Robert mirrored him, saluting the memorial and the faces now temporarily attached to it. After holding the salute for several seconds, Tom relaxed his posture and turned to Robert. Thank you, he said simply. No need to thank me, Robert replied. It's an honor. Tom seemed to really look at him then, seeing beyond the uniform. You said you were MPs in Iraq? Robert nodded. 2009 to 2010. Mostly base security, convoy protection, not frontline stuff like you. Combat is combat, Tom repeated his earlier words. You carry a weapon in a war zone. You're on the front line whether they call it that or not. Robert appreciated the sentiment but knew there was a vast difference between his experience and what Force Recon Marines went through. Still, he didn't argue the point. How long were you in Afghanistan? 3 tours. First 2 were 7 months each. Last one was supposed to be 9, ended at 6 when... Tom gestured at the photos. When it happened. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the shared understanding between them deepening without words. 2 men who had served in different ways in different places, but who carried similar invisible marks from the experience, you know, Robert said finally. The department has a veteran liaison program. Officer who runs it served in Afghanistan too. Army, not Marines, but still. Tom raised an eyebrow. You trying to get me into some program now? Just information, Robert said, raising his hand slightly. No pressure. But they help with VA issues, housing, job placement if needed. Even have a special crisis response team, officers who are veterans themselves who respond to calls involving former military. Would have been nice if they'd responded today instead of you, Tom said. But there was no bite to his words now, even a hint of humor. Robert smiled slightly. Yeah, well, dispatch doesn't always have the full picture when calls come in, but that's something we're working on improving. Tom turned back to the wall, looking at the photos he'd placed there. You know what the hardest part is? Not the flashbacks or the nightmares or even days like this. It's feeling like nobody back home gets it. Like I'm speaking a language nobody else understands, Robert nodded. He'd felt that too, even after his relatively safer deployment. The disconnect between those who had served and those who hadn't was sometimes a wider gulf than the ocean separating America from its war zones. How do you handle it? Tom asked suddenly. Being a cop after being a soldier? Isn't it, I don't know, confusing sometimes? Different rules, different threats? The question caught Robert off guard. No civilian had ever asked him that, and few fellow officers who hadn't served understood the complexity of the transition. It was rough at first, he admitted. In Iraq, clear threats, clear enemies. Here, every situation is a gray area. Had to learn to dial down the intensity, you know? Took a while to adjust the settings. Dial down the intensity, Tom repeated thoughtfully. That's a good way to put it. Still working on it, Robert added honestly. Some days are better than others. Tom laughed softly. Seems like that's the veteran motto. Some days are better than others. Could be worse, Robert said with a slight smile. Could be every day is worse than the last. That earned him a genuine laugh from Tom. The sound seemed to surprise both of them. Inappropriate near the memorial, maybe, but also desperately needed. A moment of lightness in a day heavy with remembrance. So what happens now? Tom asked after the moment passed. With this? He gestured between himself and Robert, the almost arrest situation. Nothing happens, Robert said firmly. No report, no charges. You're here honoring fallen comrades on a significant date. That's it, relief washed over Tom's face. Appreciate that. Last thing I need is trouble with the law on top of everything else. But Robert continued carefully. I would be remiss not to ask about your support system. You mentioned therapy, medication. Anything else? Family, friends, other veterans you connect with? Tom shrugged. Keep to myself mostly. Work keeps me busy. Got a few work friends, but nobody close. Nobody who knows about... He gestured vaguely at his head, at the invisible wounds he carried. Robert recognized the isolation in those words. It was all too common among veterans, especially those with PTSD. The instinct to withdraw, to protect others from your struggles, often led to a dangerous solitude. There's a vet center downtown, Robert said. Run by vets for vets. No VA bureaucracy, no government bullshit. Just people who get it. Been there once or twice, Tom admitted. Group therapy wasn't really my thing. They do other stuff too. Movie nights, community service, even camping trips. Low pressure, no therapy talk unless you want it. Just being around people who understand. Tom looked skeptical but nodded slowly. Maybe. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking, Robert said. He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back before handing it to Tom. My direct line, and on the back my personal cell. If you ever need anything or just want to talk to someone who somewhat gets it, call me. Tom stared at the card for a long moment before pocketing it. Thanks, I mean it. Robert's radio crackled to life, dispatch calling, asking for a status update. He stepped away to respond, keeping his voice low. Situation resolved peacefully. No arrest necessary, just a veteran paying respects at the memorial. When he turned back, Tom was standing at the wall again, talking quietly to the photos. Robert couldn't hear the words, but he could see the emotion behind them. Grief, yes, but also connection. A keeping of promises. He kept his distance, allowing Tom this private moment. Diane approached, keeping her voice low. Everything okay? Robert nodded. Yeah, he's a Force Recon Marine, lost his entire unit 6 years ago today. Purple Heart recipient. Was having an episode when the calls came in. Diane's expression softened. Poor guy. Glad we didn't escalate it. Me too, Robert said, watching as Tom gently touched each photo on the wall. You handled it well, Diane said. Not everyone would have taken the time to listen. Robert shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just did what needed doing. Well, it made a difference, she said simply before walking away. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Robert saw Tom carefully remove the photos from the wall, returning them to his pocket. His ritual complete, he walked back to where Robert waited. Thank you, Tom said, extending his hand. For listening. For understanding. Robert shook his hand firmly. Anytime. I mean that. As they walked together toward the parking lot, Robert couldn't help but think about how differently this situation could have ended. With handcuffs. Charges. Another veteran in crisis being treated like a criminal. Instead, a connection had formed. Unexpected, but perhaps exactly what both of them needed. Same time next year? Robert asked as they reached the lot. Tom looked surprised, then nodded slowly. Yeah, same time next year. But Robert had a feeling they'd be seeing each other long before then. I've written part 4 of the story, focusing on the connection that forms between Robert and Tom as they honor the fallen soldiers together. This section develops their relationship while providing more insight into both characters and their experiences. The narrative maintains an engaging flow with natural dialogue and emotional depth. I've kept the language accessible while ensuring the story remains meaningful and human-centered. Would you like me to continue with Part 5, the final section of the story? Or would you prefer any changes to Part 4 before moving forward? 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon at the memorial. Robert sat at his desk, scrolling through his emails when a message from the department chief caught his attention. Subject line, Veteran Crisis Response Training New Initiative. He clicked it open, already knowing what it contained, after all. He'd been the one to propose it. The email confirmed approval for his proposal, a specialized training program for officers on how to identify and appropriately respond to veterans in crisis. The first session was scheduled for next month, and the chief wanted Robert to lead it personally. A knock on his office door pulled his attention away from the screen. Officer Chen, Diane stood in the doorway. He's here, she said simply. Robert checked his watch. 10 minutes early. He shouldn't have been surprised. Thanks. Send him in. A moment later, Tom walked through the door and Robert almost did a double take. The transformation from their first meeting was striking. Tom's hair was neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. He wore a button-down shirt under a casual blazer, dark jeans, and polished boots. Most noticeable, though, was the change in his eyes, still carrying shadows of his experiences, but clearer now, more present. "You clean up nice," Robert said with a smile, standing to shake Tom's hand. "Had to dig the blazer out from the back of the closet," Tom replied with a slight shrug. "Figured if I'm speaking to a room full of cops, I should look somewhat respectable." "They're going to be too busy taking notes to judge your wardrobe," Robert assured him. "Ready for this?" Tom took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked together down the hallway toward the department's largest conference room. Officers were already filing in, filling coffee cups, claiming seats. Several nodded respectfully to Robert. A few eyed Tom with curiosity. "Nervous?" Robert asked quietly. "Terrified," Tom admitted. "Public speaking wasn't covered in force recon training." "Just talk to them like you talk to me," Robert said. "That's all this is, sharing your experience so they can do their jobs better." Tom nodded, squaring his shoulders slightly. Old habits never really died. The training session was Robert's brainchild, born directly from his encounter with Tom. After that day, he couldn't stop thinking about how easily the situation could have gone sideways. How close they'd come to treating a combat veteran having a PTSD episode like a common criminal. It wasn't just Tom. There were thousands of veterans in the city, many struggling with invisible wounds. The police needed better tools, better understanding. So Robert had drafted a proposal: comprehensive training for all officers on recognizing signs of veteran-specific trauma, de-escalation techniques tailored to military experience, and resources for appropriate follow-up care. The chief, a Vietnam-era veteran himself, had approved it immediately. The key component, the one Robert was most proud of, was bringing in veterans like Tom to share first-hand experiences. Not as cautionary tales, but as experts on their own reality. "Officers, take your seats," Robert called out as they entered the room. The chatter died down, all eyes turning to the front. 30 officers, from rookies to veterans of the force, waiting expectantly. "Today marks the first session of our new veteran crisis response training," Robert began. "As many of you know, our city is home to thousands of veterans. Some are thriving. Others are struggling with challenges most civilians can't imagine. Our job is to serve and protect everyone in this community, including those who've already served to protect us." He gestured to Tom, standing tall beside him. "This is Tom Reed, former Force Recon Marine, 3 combat tours in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient. A few weeks ago, I nearly arrested him for disorderly conduct at the Veterans Memorial." A murmur went through the room. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. "It would have been the wrong call," Robert continued frankly. "Tom was experiencing a PTSD episode on the anniversary of losing his entire unit. What he needed wasn't handcuffs, it was understanding. I'm sharing this not to embarrass myself, but because I believe we can all do better, and doing better starts with listening." Robert stepped aside, giving Tom the floor. For a moment, Tom seemed frozen, facing the room full of officers. Then he pulled something from his pocket, the worn photo of his unit, and placed it on the podium in front of him. "My name is Tom Reed," he began, his voice quiet at first but gathering strength. 6 years ago, I was the sole survivor of an ambush that killed 7 of my brothers in arms. When I came home, I brought more than just physical injuries with me." For the next 20 minutes, Tom spoke about his experiences, not just the trauma of combat, but the challenges of reintegration. The triggers that could send him spiraling back to Afghanistan in an instant. The symptoms that civilians often misinterpreted as aggression, intoxication, or mental instability. The isolation that came from feeling like no one could understand. "When Officer Hayes approached me that day," Tom said, nodding toward Robert, "I was in a different place, a different time. I wasn't seeing a police officer. I was seeing another threat in a world that had become nothing but threats. My training kicked in. Assess, evade, resist." The room was completely silent now, every officer fully engaged. "But Officer Hayes did something different," Tom continued. "He saw past the behavior to what was causing it. He recognized another soldier, even in a different uniform. He listened." Tom paused, making eye contact with officers around the room. "That's all I'm asking from all of you. Just listen first. See the person behind the crisis. It might save a life." When Tom finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Robert saw several officers, tough, seasoned cops who prided themselves on their emotional armor, discreetly wiping their eyes. The questions came next. Thoughtful, engaged questions about specific behaviors to watch for, techniques for de-escalation, resources to offer. Tom answered each one candidly, without sugarcoating the realities, but also without feeding into stereotypes about dangerous vets or ticking time bombs. By the end of the session, Robert could see the impact on his colleagues' faces. This wasn't just another mandatory training to check a box. This was something that would change how they approached their work. As the officers filed out, many stopped to shake Tom's hand, thank him for his service, or share brief stories of their own military connections. A brother in the Navy, a mother who'd served in Desert Storm, their own time in uniform before joining the force. "That went better than I expected," Tom said when the room had finally emptied. "You're a natural," Robert replied. "They really heard you? Think it'll make a difference?" "I know it will. We've already got the next 5 sessions scheduled with different shifts. By the end of the month, every officer in the department will have heard your story." Tom picked up the photo from the podium, looking at it for a long moment before carefully returning it to his pocket. "Rodriguez would get a kick out of this. Me lecturing cops." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "He always said I should be a teacher." "He wasn't wrong," Robert said. "You've got more sessions scheduled?" Tom nodded. 2 at the VA next week. 1 at the Community College Criminal Justice Program the week after that. He paused. The Veteran Center downtown asked if I'd consider running a support group. For combat vets specifically. "Are you going to do it?" "Thinking about it," Tom admitted. "Never saw myself as a group leader type, but if it helps others, it's worth trying," Robert finished for him. "Something like that," Tom agreed. They walked together toward the exit, a comfortable silence between them. Outside, the spring afternoon was bright and clear, a stark contrast to the overcast day they'd first met. "You know," Robert said as they reached the parking lot, 6 years is a long time to carry something alone." Tom glanced at him. "Speaking from experience?" "Maybe," Robert admitted. "My tour wasn't like yours, but I brought stuff back too. Kept it locked down, didn't talk about it. Nearly cost me my marriage, definitely cost me some peace of mind. And now, still working on it. Like everything else, some days are better than others." Tom laughed softly at the callback to their previous conversation. The veteran motto. "But there are more better days now," Robert added. "That's the difference. Talking helps. Connection helps? Is that what we've got? A connection?" Tom asked, but there was no challenge in his voice, just genuine curiosity. Robert considered it. "We've got to start. Different branches, different wars, different experiences, but some common ground." "Common ground," Tom repeated thoughtfully. "Been a while since I had that with anyone." "Well," Robert said, extending his hand, "you've got it now. And not just with me. 30 more officers in there who understand a little better because of you." Tom shook his hand firmly. Guess something good came out of that day after all. As Robert watched Tom walk to his car, he thought about how differently things could have gone. How close they'd come to adding trauma upon trauma instead of building understanding. One different choice, one moment of failing to truly see the person behind the crisis, and today never would have happened. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Chief says great job with the training. Wants to make it department standard procedure. You started something important here." Robert smiled. Maybe they both had. "I've written the final part of the story, bringing the narrative to a satisfying conclusion, while showing how the encounter between Robert and Tom led to positive changes for both of them and their community. Part 5 focuses on the resolution aspects from your original outline. Robert implementing the training program, Tom becoming involved as a consultant, and their experience becoming a bridge for better understanding between law enforcement and veterans. The narrative maintains an engaging and natural tone throughout, with dialogue that feels authentic and emotional moments that resonate without being overly sentimental. The language remains accessible while telling a meaningful story with human connection at its center. The complete 5-part story now provides a cohesive narrative arc from confrontation to understanding to positive change, all while keeping the reader engaged throughout.